Thank you all for joining our or our project pitch workshop. We do have a guest speaker here today. I'm going to turn it over to Karen um, momentarily to do the introductions. Along the way, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I can ask Eric here, or we will probably have some time for Q&A at the end, and I will help moderate that. Just one quick reminder before we jump in is if you could please sign up for your practice pitch sessions and the full pitch sessions by the end of this week, that would be great so we can make sure it gets on our external review board and executive committee calendars. And I'll send those links out again since I know there was always some issue with Microsoft bookings with the first round that I sent. Anyway, yep, I'm going to turn it over to Karen here, and thank you all for joining us.
Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone. I know I missed the last workshop, but it is my pleasure to introduce Eric Harry, who's here with us today to lead this pitch workshop. Eric is the founding director of the Wacholtz Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center, or WIC, which is a new hub based at the Flathead Valley Community College in Northwest Montana. And it's really designed to support innovators and entrepreneurs, but really just problem solvers across Northwest Montana and beyond to help bring ideas into real world ventures and see that real world impact that we're always talking about. I'm very excited that Eric's leading this workshop. He's very much a builder himself. He's built a number of companies. He's served in executive leadership roles, including in a handful of medical product companies that are really interesting. And we just had a wonderful few conversations about his approach to helping entrepreneurs and building an innovation ecosystem. So he's going to guide us through how to think about pitching and how to approach this upcoming pitch presentation and talk with the Rocky Mountain Reach External Review Board members about your ideas and how to go about that. So thank you everyone for being here, and thanks, Eric. I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. Can everyone see that okay?
Looks good.
Perfect. All right. So let's come back here. I'm just gonna. Maria had been misdiagnosed 3 times, not because her doctors were careless, because the test didn't exist yet. So I'm here to help you create your pitch for this program. Just a little bit of quick background for what applies to kind of what you're doing. I have been a part of several health startups, both in emerging markets in Africa, Central and South America. I've helped lead a product through all the way through SBIR phase 2. I've also been in the USDA process, as well as FDA. So I understand this world fairly well, although I'm not a clinician. Uh, I understand the clinical world and how to bring products to market as well as how to pitch. And so I hope that I can be helpful today in this process. And just a reminder that your technology has a patient behind it. And today I want to teach you how to introduce them first. So number one, most important, you need to fall in love with the problem. Every pitch in this program started with someone who couldn't stop thinking about a problem, or at least that's what I hope. It's not an invention, it's a problem. Someone was suffering, a system was failing, something was missing. That obsession is your most fundable asset. And I want to show you how to do that. And just quickly, if you, some of you may be familiar with the company Waze, which was acquired by Google. So the founder, Yuri, once said that imagine it is 2007 and I'm starting Waze. And I came to you and said, I'm building an AI crowdsourced based navigation system. You probably don't care. Now, if I said, I'm going to help you avoid traffic jams, then suddenly you do care, right? So very simple, fall in love with the problem. And also the reality is investors aren't looking for how well you know the solution. They want to know that you understand the problem. And the part of that is because if you're obsessed with the problem, even if the idea that you have to solve it doesn't work and you're smart enough, you'll find a way to pivot, right? So investors are really looking for you as the team, the individual, and then that you truly understand the problem because then you have the ability to move and pivot if necessary. So today we're going to cover kind of 6 spaces. We'll go briefly the investor mindset, what judges are actually deciding, a story of one, how we want to open our pitch, the 4 Cs, pitch architecture. We'll do backup slides, Q&A, and then also mindset, and then I'll open it up for you guys to have Q&A. Everything that I built here is built on principles. It's not, there are some frameworks here, but we're really talking about the principles of how to communicate and execute a pitch from a human perspective. And a lot of it where it's possible is based on research. So the investor mindset, number one, can I trust this team to turn this science into something that reaches patients, right? They've read your application, so come to advance the story, don't repeat it. They're betting on you, right? Not your technology, and they're betting on your relationship to the problem. So if you're obsessed with a solution or, some big paycheck on the end of this, it'll become fairly apparent pretty quick. So just know that if you're not in love with the problem, you're gonna have to shift that mindset. And then they fund the intersection of urgent problem, believable solution, and obsessed team. Very important to think about. So the force, well, let me just keep going here. So the story of one. So the problems human face, right? Proof that you've been paying attention. This is what we're going to go to. Here's an example of what I mean. In love with a solution, this is what it sounds like. 47 million Americans live with chronic kidney disease. The economic burden exceeds 120 billion annually. Our novel biomarker panel targets early stage detection via proprietary assay platform versus Maria's 52, a teacher in Billings. She noticed the fatigue 2 years before her diagnosis. 3 doctors missed it, not from carelessness, but because the test didn't exist yet. One is heard, processed, and forgotten. The other one is felt and it's remembered, and it's likely what's going to get funded. So when you talk about building your story one, it's really important to understand that there's kind of 4 steps here, and you don't structure your slide or your story on these steps, but this is how you build it. And it's perfectly okay if you actually don't know a person yet. You can create the narrative. You don't have to have a real person yet, but you need to understand who this problem affects and tell that story effectively. And it's quite simple, right? You need to name them. They need to have an age, a place, what they do, right? The moment the system failed them, where your technology enters and what changes it for that person. In this case, Maria, right? And that her story is not rare. Your statistics, and if you talk about this, your statistics later will earn the place, right? But think about your work, who's one person this touches. And like I said, if you don't know someone, that's fine. You don't need a real individual. You need to composite what is legitimate in the sense that like you're understanding that this problem has a name, right? And you can create that narrative. The 4 steps, like I said, are how you build the story. They're not how you tell it. So please don't take this and then try to like tell it like the structure. But it's very simple, as you saw at the very beginning of the slide, and we can go back here in a little bit if you want to see it. So there's decades of behavioral economics research behind this. A named person activates the parts of the brain that produce caring and action. A statistic doesn't. That's not a storytelling advice, it's psychology. And that's why when I don't know how old a lot of you are, but when I was growing up, when we watched regular TV and there would be these ads for nonprofits, and they always told the story of one kid, right? Because they knew that pulls at your heartstrings. If you say something like, 47,000 people died, it's like it feels too obscure. It's hard to put your mind around. You name a person, you can connect immediately, right? So it is quite powerful. So with that, I want to move to how I think you can frame this whole pitch. And I think this is a really good framework too for just in your writing in general, is the 4 Cs. You need to make sure that it's clear, it's concise, it's credible, and it's compelling. And if you can always go back to these 4 Cs, these are principles, right? So you can come back to this and ask yourself, number one, is it clear? And that's like, a 10-year-old and a VC both understand what you do and why it matters. Richard Feynman, the physicist who since passed, said, look, if you want to know if you really understand something truly, try to teach it to a 12-year-old, right? And if you can't do that, then you don't really understand it. And it's true. I have a 9-year-old. He asks me why 6, 7 times. I get to a place where I actually have to say, I actually don't know how this works. Because he got me to a level where I was like, I'm just saying what I've always been told. It exposes you, right? So we want to avoid jargon. And oftentimes, like smart people will pick up pretty quickly that you're just filling space, right? Like you're saying a lot of things, but you're not saying anything really that's that helpful. You want it to be concise. Every sentence earns its place. Say the essential thing, then stop. This is another principle, right? Like you want to take as much away from the sentence as you can until all that's left is what's necessary, right? You as the individual are what brings the compelling piece to it. So keep it simple. Times, and this is not a shot, but researchers tend to over-explain. I recently had a conversation with a PhD in chemistry. He's a wood polymer expert. He came to me, had all these innovations he's working on. I didn't understand a thing he was saying. And then I simply said, look, I don't understand what you just said in the last 10 minutes. Can you please tell me of all the things you've told me and the innovations you're working on, how does that look commercially? What does that do for someone in the world? And he said, well, if you put this innovation in a wood I-beam in a home, that home will take 2 hours to burn down and not 20 minutes. So it gives the fire department time to come and respond and possibly save your home. I was like, now I can understand that. I can get behind that. That makes sense to me. And oftentimes what you'll see, if you get more specific into like an industry, you might have investors that are like they understand the industry you're in, but a lot of times early stage, especially with angels, they might not know your industry. They might not know the clinical side of things. And so you have to help them draw them in, help them understand what this means for them as a human, as an individual. It needs to be credible. Oh, sorry. Evidence, team, and honesty about what you don't yet know. And this is very important. Do not fake what you don't know. Actually, if you don't know something, it's much better to say I don't know it, but then come back and say, but here's how I'm going to find out. Right? Don't lie, don't be dishonest, because it will, if it doesn't get caught in the pitch later on, it'll be found out. Own it up front, and that shows that you're open, right? And you're also willing, and you have a process for how you'll go about figuring it out, right? Overconfidence is a huge red flag. Nobody's perfect. Nobody's got this figured out, especially at this stage, very early stage. You're going to have so many different pivots, right? So you don't know everything. It doesn't mean that you're not competent. It just means you have to embrace the fact that you don't know something, own it, and that's going to give you more respect from the folks that you're leaning on to get investment or whatever it is you're asking for. And lastly, it's compelling. Someone in that room should lean forward, right? That happens when the problem's real. That actually starts with the problem. You want to watch for data, right? Informs, right? Because the story is what moves things. Lead with the problem, not with the product. There will be time for that later. So with that, here's just some examples. So what's not clear? Our algorithm leverages multimodal biomarker fusion via transformer architecture. Say what it does for the patient first. Technology is the how, not the why. Okay. Keep it concise. A 22 slide deck that's 11 minutes in, you're still in the background. Some of you may be familiar with this, right? In your experience, 5 to 8 slides, one idea per slide. And if it doesn't serve the problem, cut it out, right? Get to the bare minimum, get to principles, right? Credible. And this is something we're going to talk about in a minute. But our total addressable market is 40 billion. What does that mean? I don't know. Show you know the real buyer, right? You understand the market, you understand who would be paying for this. and ground every claim in the problem's reality. And compelling, opening with a statistic instead of a story. We've already talked about this, but it needs to be reiterated. An individual is far more powerful than a large number that's hard to really kind of wrap your head around. So open with the patient, and open with the problem and let the numbers follow. So we're going to move to pitch architecture here, but I want to be very clear that this is just a way to create your pitch. There's not one right way, right? But this is the kind of way that I would structure it. And obviously you can do what fits best for you, because under this is, once again, principles. So number one is your story of one. So you start with the story, and notice that you don't start with who you are. You don't start with your team or your background. You start with the story. You want to immediately try to hook and draw people in. Then you talk about the problem, right? You want to make sure you're addressing an unmet need. You want to name who's suffering and why the current solutions fall short. Then, in the third, you want to suggest your solution plus its impact. Use plain language here. Don't get into don't be mechanistic and go back to, over detailed. Plain language. What changes for the patient and what the gap costs today. And then here's a really, really important piece is the momentum. So you're very early, right? So you're probably not going to have what you would traditionally call traction, but you can momentum. You have proof that the problem solution fit has been tested. Maybe a prototype, a pilot, a partnership, a letter of interest. It doesn't matter. You just need to display that there's some momentum in this, right? And then you can come in with your evidence. You don't need a lot during the pitch. This is only 10 minutes. It's going to be very fast. One proof point, stated plainly, and then stop, right? Your beachhead in dollars, like meaning the main thing is like, here's the money, and then here's the buyer. Especially in healthcare, that's really, really important. As one example, I was working with a company who's in the private ambulance business, and they needed help. I sat down with them. They couldn't tell me their financials. They didn't even know they had 5 service lines. And what's most important is they didn't they didn't understand that when they entered this business that their primary customer was not the person they were picking up, but the payer or the buyer, right? So in this case, it's Medicaid and Medicare. Which if you don't understand that, you didn't do the math right. Look, every ride that they do loses $400 on average, because you have to go track down Medicaid, Medicare to get that paid out. And they often always pay less than what you spent, right? But if you don't understand that market, then you're kind of up a creek. And then you want to make sure at the last piece that you clearly state your milestones. And this is where you talk about the team, its connection to the problem, and then your vision and your ask. This is all after you've kind of laid the groundwork for understanding like who is the person most affected, what is the problem, and then you've been able to demonstrate some momentum in that process. So with momentum, this is really important. It's anything that shows your problem solution fit has been tested in the real world, right? It's not the idea, the evidence that someone else, a patient, provider, partner, or payer believes this problem is real and worth solving. And so what counts? And look, it's a working prototype, even rough, pilot data, right? Partnership or a letter of intent, customer discovery interviews. No, and not AI, right? So artificial intelligence is incredible tool for your market research. It's also incredible for building customer personas or narrowing down who your target customers are. It's great for that. But you still have to go out in the world and have real conversations with real people, right? That's going to just help refine and get a closer target to who you need to speak to and talk to. But if you're not out in the world doing the work, you're not getting real momentum. You're not confirming that this is actually a problem and that there's potential. Perhaps you have a collaborating clinician on the team, someone that has maybe more influence, someone that has, established themselves in the clinical setting that maybe can help you test your product in real time, which I know is quite a challenge. And so if you can get that, if you have that, that's an incredible sign of momentum is to have actually someone that you can test in real time with, a champion for your problem and your solution. So back in 2016, I was head of innovation for the state of Massachusetts, and my job was to tie the venture capitalists to the healthcare system and give the innovators and entrepreneurs access to the healthcare system. One of the problems we had, well, two problems. One is we had a lot of folks that had ideas that were trying to force their solutions looking for a problem into the healthcare system. And the second piece is if you didn't have a champion inside of the healthcare system, then your idea is going to fall short because the healthcare system, unlike other places, is incredibly hard. Most people are overworked, they're taxed, there's HIPAA compliance. It's quite challenging. So if you can find someone that's already in the system that wants to champion your idea, that is a huge sign of momentum. And so for us, what we did was we actually went into the healthcare system. We built real problem sets. Here's the key point. We started with the problem, right? Then we got champions, someone in the healthcare system who works full time, a doctor, a medical biller, a coder, it didn't matter. And they were like, we're all on board because when we identified the problems, we said, look, if we can bring some innovators into this building, an entrepreneur, they could help solve this pain point for you, right? And then they're all in. They're like, well, how can I help, right? Within the laws and the rules, but how can I help you get access to a system, ask better questions, do customer interviews, do observations, what have you? Like that's really, really important if you can get that, and it's powerful. So your evidence, let's talk about the one proof point. Okay, so what not to do. Once again, lots of words. Our proprietary multi-model biomarker fusion platform leverages on and on and on and on. It's not clear, right? It's full of jargon. There's three problems in that one sentence. It's buried under complexity. There's no patient. And then because it's so overwhelming, there's no problem, right? It's just a bunch of numbers and data. The better way to say this is in a 47 patient pilot, our test detected early stage chronic kidney disease 2 years before the standard diagnostic threshold in patients who had previously been cleared. I can understand that as a non-clinician. That seems to be pretty profound. I'm drawn in, I want to know more, right? It's clear, um, it's concise, it's really one sentence, it's credible, right? It's honest and it's specific and it connects back to that story that you told, right? So you're introducing more data, more facts, but in a simple way that continually connects to the thread of the story. So everything else, mechanism, full data set, the assay methodology, all of that stuff that's on the left can live in a backup slide because you may have someone that wants to know more about that, but that's the Q&A. That's the backup slide. That's when you get to go in the deep dive. But no one's going to want to hear that or ask that if they're not hooked already. So I do want to, this is one area where I see how many entrepreneurs come to this portion of the pitch and they think that TAM is their market, right? And it just constantly happens. That is like saying, okay, there's a $4 billion market. Let's just say, for instance, the last medical device company I was in, we were in cardiothoracic surgery, and we had a product with an adjacent market opportunity in dialysis. Well, the number one leader in dialysis is Fresenius Medical, right? They're a multi-billion-dollar company worldwide. If then you have an innovation that maybe could disrupt that market, you come in and say your market is, X billion dollars worldwide, then what you're saying is as soon as we launch this product, we're going to immediately take out Fresenius Medical and replace them. That's not realistic, right? The second, what investors are most interested in is the path from SAM, which is the serviceable addressable market, right? That's the slice you can realistically reach given your technology, your geography, and all the regulatory pathway needs, right? But even then, that's not what you're going to do first, right? You have to do what's called YAM, your addressable market. So within that serviceable market, how are you going to capture some of that? And what's the pathway forward, right? So, like for instance, if you're focused on rural and underserved diagnostic gap, patients without a specialist access. Like that's a pretty big market, right? But maybe like that's where you're going for. But what's reasonable for your launch is 12 rural health systems in Montana. Like it's just one, like it's, it's one or two clinics. That's fine, right? That's actually being reasonable and saying this is where we're going to start first. And that's kind of where investors and anyone that's smart wants to see what's your pathway from SAM to YAM. If you start with TAM and say that's my market, they're going to know you didn't do your homework. You don't understand the buyer, right? And you probably just searched on Google or AI, which AI can help you with this, right? But it's really, really important that you talk about the path from SAM to YAM and you are honest about how you approach your addressable market. So with that said, I just want to come back to this piece here because I know it could be easy to fall into. So this is the thing that's in the document, right? That you've probably seen, right? This is the score criteria, but this is not necessarily your pitch structure, right? So don't go and build a slide for the story, build a slide for innovation, build a slide for impact. You do want to use this as your checkbox. Did I cover all this? Right? And did I use the four C's? Was it clear? Was it concise? Was it credible? Was it compelling? But don't build your slides based on this because unfortunately, a lot of the investors, the judges, they're not going to grade you like this, and they may think that you kind of shipped it in as well because you just followed a piece of the document. They want to see that you could create this, but please do use this to ensure that you're covering the criteria. Just don't build your slide deck like this. So this is where, so for instance, you've got your pitch, which is 10 minutes, right? So it's going to be super fast. It may feel like an eternity for you, but it'll be pretty fast, right? If you cover what we talked about, this is though where you get to go into detail and you do want to have some kind of forethought. You're not going to be able to control the conversation here, but you can at least be ready. And this is where like the magic happens for you because the first 10 minutes is really about you convincing them that it's worth hearing and asking more. So the 20-minute opportunity. So first is I'm going to give you some questions that I think you should prepare for that are pretty common in this industry. Also want to make sure we're framing the I don't know as credibility, not as weakness. Definitely don't fight questions. Right. So reframe it. If the question is poorly asked or it's clear, like I'm not going to sit here and say that someone who's judging whether they be an investor or not always asks the best questions or even understands what you're doing. But don't fight the question. At best case scenarios, you reframe it, right? Maybe you change the question a little bit to help them. But also understand that when they're asking you a question, it also is giving you information that either one, they don't fully understand it, and or maybe you missed something. So it's feedback for you too. And then always be ready with backup slides and kind of your what I call your Q&A arsenal. So one focus slide per deep dive topic. And once again, this shouldn't live in your main deck. So the one last thing I'll say, and it's at the top there, is just remember that if you really are in love with the problem, then you're going to welcome the hard questions because the hard questions are going to help you get better, right? They're going to help you understand differently. It's the same thing with entrepreneurs. True entrepreneurs have a completely different relationship with failure. It's not that they don't feel it. It just means that they have a healthier relationship with failure than, say, someone who doesn't. All right, so for preparing for the Q&A, here's 5 questions I think you should have in your back pocket, and you can build a slide per each. A lot of times, especially folks that have been in the clinical or healthcare space, know how burdensome and challenging FDA can be. So if your product has any pathway through that process, you need to be able to demonstrate that you understand what it's going to take and the costs, as well as maybe some roadblocks or challenges. Who's your real customer? Got to know this. So important. I would be shocked if you weren't asked it, but you may not, and that's fine, but at least know it and have it ready so you can refer to it. How do you know this works, right? Your best evidence in one sentence, then stop and let them ask more. So just tell them in plain, like, here's one sentence, here's how I know this works, and then allow them to ask questions. Why you, why now? So your relationship to the problem, why is it, and why is it followed your team? When we say followed your team means like if you're in love with the problem, you just can't not try to solve it. You're obsessed with it, right? You go home with it in your mind, you wake up thinking about it. Like, why? Why does it matter so much? And then the last piece is, what does the 50,000 actually unlock? One crisp milestone, not a list of activities. And then maybe what does success look like in 12 months for the patient, right? So come back to that. What does it look like for the patient? And then here's kind of your general just backup slide, your 6 core slide. So your regulatory pathway, any detailed science you want to have there and that's ready. So if you do end up having someone more clinically based, or then you might want to have this just ready to refer to if you need to. Once again, though, keep it simple but detailed enough that you can demonstrate you understand the science behind it. A market deep dive. So in the previous slide, you might mention the TAM, SAM, in your addressable market. But here's where you can kind of break down and demonstrate the details and how you really got there. And we can talk about that in a minute in the Q&A if you need help with that. I can at least give you a starting point. Your competitive landscape. So it's really good to have an idea of competitors, both directly in the market and possible adjacent. So at least you're demonstrating you've thought about it. You understand when you enter the market, and if you've done your market deep dive, you know who your competitors are, right? You know who's the market leader, what it would take to maybe take some of that market share for them. That being said, you need to have a clear understanding of your competitive landscape. Budget breakdown. That could be another question that some people ask, is because frugality is another thing that at least early stage investors want to see. Are you frugal? Do you know how to spend the least amount of possible to build something meaningful? Because that also shows a skill set, right? And then this is where you might have full team bios. Somebody might want to dig in and say, tell me more about who you are, give me your background. This is where you want to have your complete credentials. I've expanded from your 2 sentence pitch version in the 10 minutes. So definitely don't do a complete credential bio in your regular pitch. You can get there. All right. And then this is a really important one that I think is often neglected, and it's a real opportunity, is this is your billboard slide. So when you get done with your 10-minute pitch, this is what you want to stop on. And it lives up there. Now I get you're doing it virtual. So that's fine. In virtual, you would leave the slide up here so they could see it. If you were doing this in real person, it would just be sitting behind you. So you want to have a clear problem statement, 1 sentence. You want to have your solution, plain language, right? Your single strongest evident point, team thumbnails, so maybe a name, a credential in each, and then contact information. And this is really important because it's just reminding everyone that you have a clear understanding of the problem. Here's your simple solution, your strongest evidence point, but also then a reminder that who you are, right? And I think that's really important. And the thing is, at the very bottom, this is really like, this sums up we talked about, pitching for 10 minutes, but there's this elevator pitch. So as an example, we had a huge event here the other night, and we had several entrepreneurs that had no way of explaining what problem they were trying to solve, their solution. They were building meaningful things, but they had never really practiced how to like clearly state a problem and their solution in a way that made sense. So a lot of people left not really getting any kind of additional support or next steps because they didn't have a clear way to explain their problem and their solution, which is pretty common because they get excited and they go into all the details. So basically, what's important here is if someone walked in during the Q&A, say someone missed the entire 10 minutes, they could look at this sitting behind you or on the screen and know immediately what the problem is, what's your solution, right? The evidence point and who you are. And so they could basically get that 10 minutes in one slide, right? And they could catch up pretty quick. And if you can't build this slide, then you need to go back and start over because you don't understand the problem. You don't have a solution. Does that make sense? So this is important. This will be a litmus test for where you're at. And then here's one unique thing that I think is really important. And I want to share a quick personal story here. So, the first time, I built a company, self-funded, and I'd done pitches, won pitch competitions, yada yada. But this was the first time I'd ever pitched in front of investors for actual funding. And I was incredibly stressed. We had some team dynamic issues. And I overthought it because I don't know if any of you are familiar with Techstars, but I was in Boulder, was pitching to a bunch of Techstars investors, a lot of big names. So I was overwhelmed, I was terrified, and I tried to memorize my pitch word for word instead of trusting that I knew the problem and the solution. And just kind of going out there and obviously you want to practice your pitch. You definitely want to practice your pitch, but I tried to memorize everything and I tried to make sure every word was memorized. But I was really stressed and I took it really serious in a way that's not healthy. And I got up there, I started with the story, right? Halfway through the story, my mind went blank, just left, gone. And to make it worse, I dropped the F-bomb. I just came out of me and like at that point my life was over. Like I was like, this is the worst thing that could ever happen. I figured out, it felt like an eternity. It was probably like 5 seconds. It came back to me and I finished, right? But I thought like this is over, it's done. So with with performing under pressure. So what happened after that, like I thought it was over, but I had so many investors come up to me afterwards and still want to invest in my company, wanted to mentor me and support me. And I don't think it was because they felt sorry for me. It certainly made me a memorable pitch, dropping the F-bomb in the middle of it for sure. But it's because I clearly demonstrated that I understood the problem and that I was really passionate about it and that I had the skill set and the willingness to figure it out if I could, if it didn't work. They saw that through the pitch and the follow-on Q&A. I survived the pitch and I was able to do the Q&A just fine because it was more natural, right? But that's because I clearly stated that I understood the problem and I loved trying to solve this problem. But that being said, I could have definitely avoided that if I come with a different mindset. And so I want to cover that here because I think it's really important. And 4 studies that I want to kind of cover quickly is the challenge versus threat theory, an fMRI study on founder passion, anxiety reappraisal, and entrepreneur pitch study. So this is data actually surrounding pitches, which is really fascinating. Number one, don't try to calm down, right? So how many times have we been taught when you're stressed to try to calm down? Stress is actually a good thing, right? If you're stepping out in front of a bunch of people, $50,000 is on the line. And then also, if you have a deep desire to solve a problem and help people, it can be quite overwhelming, right? And it's trying to calm down is actually the worst thing you can do. Instead, you need to reshape your mindset. You need to reframe it. So instead of saying I'm nervous, like instead of saying, I'm really nervous, sad, nervous because I care about this problem. I know it sounds so simple, but it's really powerful. And you're going to get in the moment where it's time for you to step up to the stage or on the screen, and you're going to feel that anxiety. Just say, hey, I care about the problem. That's why I'm so nervous. And take a breath and go for it. And then the third piece is ask, do I have what it takes to handle the next 30 minutes? Right? You know your story, you got your backup slides, you got your 5 questions. The answer is yes, right? Just say, I got this. I have everything I need. Now go out there and be yourself because ultimately that's what investors are going to invest in is you, right? So don't be someone you're not. Trust that you've done the work and then let go and be yourself in the pitch. And then understand too, the energy you bring influences how they see you. So if you come back here, like what's interesting, when they did a fMRI study of actually investors, right? So using the fMRI, they found that the founders that displayed high passion increased investor neural engagement by 39%. So what does that mean? As intelligent and as smart and as mechanical as an investor may present themselves to be, at a subconscious level, they're still very human. They're connecting on emotional level, right? So that's why the story is so important. That's why your passion and your excitement for the problem is really powerful. It happens at a subconscious level, but you can guarantee the investors are being compelled one way or another by the energy you bring and your passion for the problem. And after this, I'm going to put a link in Zoom for you for a podcast that you can listen to from an investor that talks just about this. They'll talk about the team, right? They want to invest in the team. They want to invest in the problem. They're not necessarily interested in the solution because they believe that the problem is big enough and the team is good enough that they'll figure out a way, right? And that's what they invest in. And then the last piece I want to mention again is in the pitch study. So in real pitch competitions, entrepreneurs who link their anxiety to their passion for the venture received higher funding evaluations. So that's that reframe, like, oh, I'm nervous because I'm passionate about this. So lean into that instead of trying to remove your anxiety. Just reframe it as passion and excitement. All right. So all that said, you fell in love with the problem first. Now show us, right? When you log in on May, you're not representing your technology. You're representing every person who has this problem and doesn't have your solution yet. Pitch from there. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions.
I don't have much of a question. I'm just highly impressed at the information. Something. Have you ever heard the difference? I'm an engineer. Have you ever
Okay.
heard the difference between an inverted engineer and an extroverted engineer?
No.
When you talk to an inverted engineer, they look at they look at their shoes. And when you talk
Ah.
to an extroverted engineer, they look at your shoes. And so we don't often have the people skills or the ideas built around what you're saying. And I've been trying to be more extroverted in this. So this helps me a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me just say, like, don't try to be something you're not. Obviously, you got to move into some discomfort because you're presenting to other people, but still very much be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not. The extroverted piece, if that's what you call it, is just you doing that uncomfortable thing of not looking at your shoes or their shoes and looking at their faces. And I'm glad you brought that up because you're doing virtual, it'll be very tempting for you all to just read your slides because you have it on the screen in front of you. Try your best not to read the slides and make eye contact with the camera. So, unfortunately, I have a weird camera setup. It's up here, but like look at your camera as much as you can, make eye contact as if you were in the room looking people face to face. It can be very hard virtually because there's all these little squares. Just pick someone, pick the camera lens. I don't know, put a face up there. It doesn't matter. Whatever you need to do to keep your eyes on the camera as much as possible would be very helpful for you.
I had a question. So we've been really focused on the total, the TAM
Yeah,
part of what our technology is going to address.
yeah.
Do you have advice on how to get towards the SAM and the YAM?
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked that. I'm glad you also recognize that working on I mean, TAM is good to know, right? But nobody cares about TAM because that's not your market. Yeah, there's several ways you can approach it, right? And if you're in a new industry, or potentially new industry, it can be a little harder, but there's two methods for calculating your market size. There's the top down or the bottom up. The best practice is to use both. But top down is to start with the industry data, then narrow by geography, patient population, and regulatory access. It's a big number grab, right? So then you do the opposite, then go from the bottom up, start at price times the number of your specific reachable customers. And it's slower, but it's more credible. And then you have to find, and once again, like you're making assumptions. You're making lots of assumptions. And that's okay, so long as you call that out, right? If you're like not quite sure on the numbers, but you've demonstrated you've done the work to try to get there, just say this is an assumption and it's based on these data points. Here's how we got there, right? And here's how, we think we'll get more clear. And then the last questions, and you can say if like they're like, well, that doesn't make sense to me, XYZ, you can say, hey, I actually don't know that, but here's how we'll get there. Like, so own that part. But what you're really wanting to demonstrate is that you've done the work to try your best to figure out that SAM and TAM situation and how you're going to go about getting there, right? So, like I said, when you launch, whenever that is, in day one, you don't immediately take someone's market share, right? You got to fight for that. And technically, you might create some value, but then it's up to you to capture it back. And so it's less about getting it perfect because you won't. It's more about demonstrating that you're thinking about the TAM to SAM pathway, excuse me, the SAM to TAM pathway, and that you're also not naive or unrealistic in the TAM situation. So that's really what this is about, is you're demonstrating you've done the work, but also call out the assumptions. There's a lot, and that's just a business way of saying your educated guesses, right? Is that helpful at all?
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Other questions? Or anyone want a workshop a piece of their slides? Tao, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. First of all, thank you very much. This is a great presentation. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. I have a question. When you evaluate or compare your product with competitors and then show why you think yours win, now there are a lot of factors. For example, you can evaluate their portability, their safety, effectiveness, efficiency, the cost. I mean, there are so many factors. What should we focus on? I mean, how to put them all together as an overall conclusion says based on this and this, or overall, or several key factors, we think our product wins. For example, you may solve the problem much better, but it costs much higher.
Mm-hmm.
So please give some comments on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't think I have a real clear answer for you on that one. Simply because that's part of the like 90% of all businesses fail after 5 years, whether that's in Silicon Valley or in, Missoula, Montana, wherever. And a lot of times it's the idea is great, but the market's not there because of costs, those kinds of things. Like sometimes you're too early to market, right? Or your solution isn't scalable because the infrastructure isn't there. And that's where your weak points are. Um, but if you can demonstrate a pathway to overcome some of those challenges over time, then that's a good, at least you're demonstrating you've thought about it, right? And you understand it's a challenge. And once again, like they're investing in you, right? And your passion for the problem. And that if you get into this and realize that, there is a major roadblock that can't be overcome because it's regulatory or it's cost prohibitive, they're going to trust that you'll figure out another way.
Okay.
So if you come up and say like your innovation is X, but it's really not feasible because the cost is too high, then you already know the answer to your own question, right? Unless you can come up with that is maybe where the innovation actually needs to happen is in the cost or in the infrastructure. Too often we think of innovation just as a product or like a new product or new service, but you can innovate within kind of the greater infrastructures that exist. You can innovate in costs. There's so many things to innovate within a business model. So you may not even create a new product, but you're creating a new way to deliver that product to the market. That's also innovation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I just saw a news, no news, a story this morning. when people invented the pen, the little balls at the end.
Yeah.
Actually, that idea was a long time ago, but only until a person reduced the cost significantly by using 3D plastic, way, and
Yeah.
it become popular, then win, many, many dollars.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it too is timing, right?
Yeah.
Timing, luck. I mean, that lot Facebook wasn't the first network,
Mm.
like there was a lot of ideas in the 90s, but because they didn't have good distribution online, we couldn't do it. Just didn't work. And then right timing, right place. And if you know the history of Facebook, that wasn't Zuckerberg's idea was not like novel, but it was just he just had the right time, had the right story. So a lot of it is about timing and understanding markets for sure.
Thank you.
I have a question. First, I have a comment. When you were showing the presentation for
Mhm.
how you should present, the way I would have presented was everything that was wrong. I'd be very data rich. So this has been really informative, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But we're working on a new antibiotic, and it's not ready to go into people yet.
Yeah.
Should we even be talking? I mean, should I have put this in my first human by the time I do this project pitch?
No, not at all.
Oh, good.
Animal studies, you know, animal studies that prove something that's momentum, right? It's not
Excellent. Okay.
traction. In the business language traction, that means the product is in the market and you're getting traction in the market. But momentum is saying like we have positive, because this where you're at, you're trying to get funded to translate ideas, right, into a market-based product or service. And then hopefully from there, you can figure out how to take the next step through SBIR phase, right, to actually build it out. So early stage, yeah, if you can just demonstrate animal models that are
Excellent.
positive, that's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Maybe just to go deeper on that, Eric, is there an approach that you've seen that has worked well in terms of keeping the storyline in that momentum when you're at the stage where you have prototyping or in vitro data or things that aren't quite ready to present in a way that says like, I have this 20-person pilot study.
Can you maybe clarify your question a little bit on like in regards
Maybe
to
just in the very early stages before you go to animal, before you go to a clinical trial and you're thinking about presenting your momentum, which might be for some of our innovators, the amount of prototype development that they've already completed.
right.
Is there a
So
way to like that you've seen done well where the story continues to maintain or that emotional element continues to maintain throughout sharing that early evidence?
yes, and I think it honestly, I mean it's so simple that it feels like it's not a good answer, but the reality is, like I said, you can create a person who isn't real, a theoretical person that this would help. You can maintain that story. Obviously, if you start moving down the road and you're figuring out that your idea isn't working, like you can only fake it so long. So we're not talking about that. Like you got to be honest with yourself. But if things continue to move on, like you just keep that narrative because that's what you're trying to say. Like this is a problem we're going to solve and we're solving for this person. You got to keep that because that's also going to help you. I don't know about anyone else, but like there's been so many times where I'm like, I'm ready to give up. Like, this is really hard. And then I think about a problem. So, as an example, I built in 2016, I built a health tech platform for village health workers in emerging markets like Africa. And at the time, I was still very much in the research phase, but my hypothesis was that if we could standardize training for village health workers, that we could increase the number of village health workers at scale because everyone was doing their own trainings. And in Africa, it's a big continent, multiple countries, but you can also start to move people around if there was a standardized training for village health workers. The challenges we had were, one, most of Village Health workers couldn't read or write, so we had to build symbols. This is 2016, so no Wi-Fi, in remote rural Africa, so it was SMS based. So we had to build on an SMS based system. And the other thing we did was we converted the healthcare. So usually a village health worker will respond to someone who's sick. In this case, we assign them household units. So it's preventative care. But I say all this to say, I didn't know anyone at the time. Specifically, I didn't know a village health worker's name. I didn't know a patient's name because we hadn't launched our pilot yet. But the Ebola crisis had just erupted, right? And what was the primary tool or mechanism that helped mitigate and eventually, the crisis was village health workers. If you didn't know that, it wasn't medicine, it was village health workers. And I just happened to know the founder of Last Mile Health, who led the effort to fight Ebola. That being said, I used that moment in time to really, because it was pertinent, everyone was scared about Ebola, what's happening. I was able to identify an individual woman who, because of her getting access to a village health worker, her and her family were helped and were, got back to health and had, all these things. So I had a picture of her, I had her name, I told her story, right? I wouldn't even, my pilot was in Malawi, right? She's in West Africa, I'm in East Africa. Didn't matter, because the point was that I was trying to say, if we can do this, this is the kind of problems we can solve, right? And I hadn't proved it out yet, but I believed it to be true. And we had some adjacent research to show that it was possible. That's all you need, momentum, right? And that storyline.
Thanks, Eric.
Mhm.
All right. I don't know if we even have time for one more question, maybe a quick one, but Lydie, I want to just make sure there's no other housekeeping that we need to handle.
I just wanted to mention really quickly, I put a few things in the chat. I'm on my LinkedIn. So feel free to connect with me. If there's anyone in my network that you're interested in meeting or you need help, please let me know. Number two is I put the podcast I had mentioned in there. If you just want to hear from an investor and how one of many investors, particularly a community-driven investor, thinks, I think it's a great listen. And then number three, I also put the Wacholtz Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center website in there. We also are building a Builders in Residence network, which is just mentors and experts. Anyone that's on our Builders in Residence network that you think would be of help to you, just go ahead and let me know. You can also fill out a form there on the site and we can get you connected with them. But if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'd love to help you if I can. If I don't know, or if I can't, then I would love to connect you with someone that can.
And Eric, that might have went to maybe a direct message instead.
I did it.
I don't know. I don't see it on my end.
Okay. Does anyone else see? I sent them all on this. Oh, it's to that's weird. Okay, let me retry really quick. Turns out
You
I
send it to my AI bot.
the AI person.
Yeah, thanks again, Eric, so much. This was really, really a great presentation, and just a couple other things to think about as you're, putting together your pitch that aren't clearly stated in the guidelines that I shared is that, again, the executive or external review board for the full pitch sessions, they will have had your full application for about a week and a half. So, we really do encourage them to take a look at that before the pitch session so that they have some of the scientific background. We do find that in the pitch sessions, they will ask questions about things that they found in your application. It's not always the case that all of the people that are on your specific pitch will have read your full application yet. We assign 3 or 4 applications per reviewer. So not everyone's seeing all of them, but just like Eric said, have some backup slides that you could show that really like highlight some of the data behind your technology, because there might be questions that get a little bit more technical. You know, the folks that are reviewing the applications do have real world clinical experience, or you know, they're subject matter experts, and we do assign them to review specific applications accordingly. So you might get somebody who really just wants to talk to you about how your technology was developed. So be prepared for that. And then again, this guidance was really great in just preparing for presenting to folks who don't know your specific field, and making it a little bit more clear for the layman to understand. And the last thing I'll say is that I always encourage our reviewers to have their cameras on, but if no one's going to during the pitch sessions, at least I will. So you can make eye contact with me, and I can be the face that you're talking to. So there will be somebody there, um, um, that feels like they're in person.
Would it be helpful if Karen, if I sent you my slide deck, you could share with the team?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the other thing I would just want to remind everyone is, remember, a researcher, a clinician is different than an investor, is different than a layman. Like, your pitch needs to be built for who you're pitching to. Also, don't be discouraged if someone is, someone who has clinical expertise in one area might think that they're an expert in another area and present that way. Don't be discouraged by that. Like, be open, but also know, like, you can disregard some things if you need to. Like, obviously not in that moment. Remember, don't reject or fight the question, but just know, like, it's not a total meltdown if someone wants to go deep into the research and clearly they don't quite understand it. Just redirect the question, be as helpful as you can, and move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's awesome advice. Thank you, everyone, for joining
Thank you.
today. Thank you, Eric. This
Yeah.
was great.
Thank
We'll
you.
follow up with the slides and the recording.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.